All right, let's talk about this source, and then we're going to look at the concept of outsourcing, and then it'll be time to go shiver outside. So before you go and shiver outside, shiver in the, it's cold, not shiver in the, here's a forearm shiver. But before you go outside and enjoy your mass break, I want you to be able to leave here knowing what outsourcing is. And I want this to be an opportunity to go back and revisit the steps. So, in terms of the steps of an A1, and I think that at the end of this course, we'll at least be able to say, hey, at least we know how to do an A1. If we need to get better at A2 next year in 20, or multiple choice next in 20, we can, but we definitely have checked off the most difficult thing, which is an A1. So the first step is always to establish what's on the page. So we see a cartoon, and you talk a little bit about the details on the page. There's nowhere in the rubric for an A1 that you get rewarded for description of the source. You're supposed to be interpreting the source. But let's be honest, you cannot interpret something until after you've already looked at the details, the nuances. So it's important for you to actually break the source down so that you can interpret it. So the first step might be looking at, okay, contextually, what's here? So you can talk about how in the background there's Manhattan and Statue of Liberty, and then you have in 2 lifeboats, you have 1 factory saying China or bust, and 1 office building saying next stop India. So you might begin with a sentence or 2 doing some description on the page. Again, it's not on the rubric, you're not going to get benefit for it, but it makes you think about, okay, wait a minute, why is that stuff there? Just by doing that step, now I'm thinking about, okay, what's the symbolic, or what's the symbolism of these things? What's the irony happening here? I'm starting to think about all those tools of analysis of cartoons because I took some time to describe it. So before we get to those things, we might look at the context. Contextually, what we see here is outsourcing. So this is outsourcing. We see jobs leaving America. So why might this be a problem? The source is showing it as a problem because the 2 individuals look a little unhappy about it. And we also know that others see this as a problem. So looking at outsourcing as a problem, why might some Americans have an issue with outsourcing? Well, let's begin with this part of the outsourcing. Who might have a problem with the outsourcing of factory jobs? Well, American factory workers. They would see a problem there. That because of this, jobs are leaving America. And we can link that problem with some of the popularity of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was elected in 2016 because he promised American factory workers that were unemployed in what we call the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt are these states that used to be the manufacturing hub of America, but many of those factories have relocated, like cities like Flint, Michigan, who lost their factories from GM. That corporation relocated in the Maquiladora sector of Mexico. So even though it doesn't say Mexico or bust, we can connect that to that outsourcing, that capital is leaving, and with it, we've seen millions of U.S. manufacturing jobs leave with it. And some states, like Ohio and Indiana and Michigan and Pennsylvania, have really struggled economically because they've lost thousands of jobs. So we're trying to find out the context. So the context is this outsourcing of jobs. And the key vocab here would be outsourcing. But other related terms might be things like economic liberalism or regional trade blocs. Because of NAFTA, GM had an opportunity to relocate to Mexico, but it doesn't say Mexico, it says China. So what we're really seeing here is a global economy where transnational corporations can relocate and go and find other workers to exploit. So due to the agenda of Bretton Woods, due to the work of IMF and the World Bank and the WTO, transnationals now have the ability to relocate their manufacturing plants to take advantage of cheaper labor elsewhere. So now workers, because of globalization, workers in Flint, Michigan are competing with workers in Puebla, Mexico for jobs. So because of globalization, we now have workers in America competing with workers elsewhere for jobs. And transnationals like GM might say that GM has to relocate out of Michigan because other corporations like Toyota or Honda or Kia or BMW, Volkswagen, they can take advantage of cheaper labor globally. So now that we are in an interconnected or a hyper-connected global village, GM has to compete with car makers from around the world. So they don't have the luxury of paying workers in Flint, Michigan a high salary compared to what they could pay workers in the maquiladora sector of Mexico. So GM might actually say this is necessary because of globalization. Whereas the workers might say this is a problem because of globalization. What we're seeing here is also some of that nature of man comment, that the loyalties of transnationals are more to profit than to flag. That's why we call them transnationals. That GM was founded in America, but because they're more than willing to relocate their factories in pursuit of profit, their loyalty isn't to America first. And that's why Donald Trump ran on that campaign of Make America Great Again. And he more than challenged US companies, US transnationals, to relocate back to America. Because as you export hundreds of thousands or even millions of jobs globally, American transnationals are building other people's economies. So it definitely connects to that. And we can also connect this. This office could be like a help center for Dell. And we looked at that, how many people that need help for, say, internet or technology, they might call Dell later at night. And it's cost effective for Dell to use a country like India, whose daytime is our nighttime. So Dell doesn't have to pay workers to work here at night. And in India, people are willing to work for a lot less than in America. So this could be a reference of a help center, or it could be a reference of a headquarters. If it's a reference to a headquarters, then sometimes headquarters relocate because of tax breaks offered elsewhere. So there's many businesses that have relocated to the Bahamas, and they might not even have any brick and mortar there, but they've relocated to countries like that because of their tax incentives to do so. So one of the challenges with globalization is that sometimes headquarters of businesses also leave, maybe reluctantly so, but they leave America because there's greater profit somewhere else. So being that in the background we have an America that doesn't show people but shows buildings, we can infer that in the future more and more buildings will be lost. And with it we're losing America. That people came to America, the Statue of Liberty's here, as a land of opportunity. Now those opportunities are leaving America. So they purposely put that there as well. So the ideological perspective of the cartoonist. Maybe the cartoonist values nationalism over globalism. Maybe an assumption is that if these businesses didn't leave America, that the assumption would be that more American workers would have jobs. And that might end up solving some of the social economic problems we see in American cities, where there's a lot of people living in poverty, and because of that there's crime and violence in the streets. So maybe an assumption is that if corporations reinvested in America, then America could be great again. Not just economically, but socially. That if we can get rid of poverty, maybe some of the things that divide Americans could also be taken care of. And there is evidence that continues that, right? There is evidence that may support that perspective. So we can talk about how communities that have lower unemployment rates are also communities that have lower crime rates. We can talk about how property ownership leads to civic values. So another step in analyzing a source is to look at, well, what evidence might continue this? But ultimately, we have to look at where's the division of society. So some people would say this is very significant because as the U.S. manufacturing core leaves America, then that's the heartbeat of America. That's why America won World War II, is because they had that manufacturing in America that could create the weapons needed to win the war. Could we win World War III right now? I'm not sure, because a lot of our factories are in China. We're fighting against China. We're not going to be able to use them to make weapons. So that's some of the significance here, but there is a division of society. Again, some of the transnationals might be saying this is necessary because of globalization. That globalization is a force. It's inevitable. And we have to adapt or die. And if GM doesn't adapt and have outsourcing, GM will die. So what's better for America? GM to stay in America and die and lose all the GM jobs, or GM to stay relevant and profitable but relocate parts of GM in branch plants and outsourcing globally? So some of the opponents of the source would say that there's an assumption here that if the American businesses stayed in America, that they could be profitable. That's an assumption. And there's a flaw of logic there, because American workers in Michigan may want in excess of $100,000 a year with overtime and benefits. Whereas in Mexico, they might get $10,000 US a year. And in Indonesia, they might get $1,000. So the argument could be made that there's a flaw in the logic, that it's as simple as just, well, why are they leaving? Just stay. Make America great again. Stay here. Well, can these corporations stay there and still be profitable? There will be proponents of the source that might try to point to evidence that once GM does leave and become global, then the profit created by GM can be reinvested in other jobs in America. So we may be seeing manufacturing jobs leave, but we still have research and innovation and development within GM in America. So we have lots of steps with our source interpretation, and nothing is ever as simple as a first glance. So with A1s, you really have to take some time to break down the significant nuances of the source. So before we go outside, let's link back to outsourcing. One problem with outsourcing is it creates confusion for consumers. And I want to show that by looking at the largest auto company in the world, Volkswagen. And because Volkswagen owns so many other car companies, so if you go and look up Volkswagen car companies, you can see that there's a list of companies that they own, and some of them are mostly just in Europe, so you might not have heard of some of them before. But obviously you've heard of Volkswagen and Audi. I just love saying Audi. Maybe you've seen Skodas on the road, but there's other cars that because they're all owned by the Volkswagen group of companies, they share parts, and it creates some confusion. When you buy a Volkswagen, what did you actually just buy? Now, where did that video go? Here it is. Nope. Where did my video go? Oh, there it is. All right. So here's a guy with the European car, and he's like, okay, well, what kind of engine do I have? says Skoda. Takes that thing off. And wait, it's actually a Volkswagen. So it's branded as a Skoda, but in reality it's a Volkswagen engine. So imagine buying an Audi, and you got an Audi TTS or an Audi TT or an Audi A5, A3. Audis are nice cars. Imagine getting your Audi and taking your little knife out there and seeing that you have the same engine that's in a Volkswagen Passat or Volkswagen Jetta. Now, but this also works a different way. As we saw from that ad, Volkswagen owns lots of different car companies. Weird story, we've got 2 Beetles, and I went outside and I popped my one Beetle, and it turns out, I've got an engine that should be in a Porsche. Just kidding, that would be beautiful, right? Or you pop it and it's like, oh man, this is a Lamborghini engine. Yeah, they obviously don't do it in that way, but what you end up seeing is you think you have a Bentley, but maybe it doesn't have all Bentley parts. So it creates brand confusion. You can pay $40,000 more for a Porsche that has the same pieces as a Volkswagen, maybe a Volkswagen Atlas. So why am I paying more for the Porsche SUV instead of the Volkswagen SUV? So brand confusion is one of the problems connected to globalization, connected to outsourcing. We really don't know, what is it that I'm buying? Here's another video, quick video, on outsourcing. And we're going to go to the world of The Simpsons. And the video is not available. So in the video, being that it's not available, the owners of the factory that Homer works in, Mr. Burns, he comes in and has an announcement, says, hey, good news, this company is going to be a lot more profitable. And then they're all cheering, and then he's like, and you guys are all fired because we're relocating the factory to, Mexico kind of thing. And then they all kind of figure out, wait a minute, maybe this isn't a good thing. All right, so outsourcing is somewhat confusing, somewhat controversial. It has a negative impact on the economies of countries that may be losing jobs. But if you see yourself as part of a global village, maybe outsourcing is the right thing to do. By jobs leaving America, you're helping to build communities in other countries, and maybe that's the humane thing to do. We're going to head out for our mask break. Make sure you dress warmly, and let's be back here. It's 10:05, so we should be back here by about 10:17.